my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker and webinar moderator, Oscar Yuan, President of Ipsos Strategy 3. Oscar, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ellen. I'm never sure whether there's a technical glitch or what happened, but thank you all for joining us today. As we head into the holiday next week, I think it's a timely topic to be talking about. WTF stands for What the Future. It's a series that we put out here at Ipsos that examines the future of specific industries that are important to our consumers, our businesses, and our economy. So over the past year, we've examined the future of mobility, the future of food, the future of beauty, the future of retail, and more recently, we've pivoted a little bit to start talking about how these industries are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So as Ellen said, my name is Oscar Yuan. I'll be your host for today. I lead Strategy 3, which is Ipsos's marketing, brand, and innovation consultancy. And as Ellen said, I encourage you guys to submit your questions in the question bar, and we'll try our best to get as many of those as we can in. And if not, as Ellen said, we will reach out to you individually to answer them after the session. So as we said, today is about the future of hospitality. Let me just move this slide there. That's a picture of me. And I think it's no question, it's no mystery that the travel industry has been hit particularly hard by the pandemic. I live in New York today. Even as I wandered the street yesterday, as we went into phase 2, you did see many restaurants that didn't open, and it's hotel rooms many of them look like they may not open afterwards after all. American Airlines, obviously, we know the impact on the airline industry. I think also big is we're starting to track a lot of the big conferences and cancellations that are happening. So whether that's the Apple Worldwide Developer Conference, the Salesforce Conference, a lot of these big global conferences that have a lot of people travel are getting cancellations, and we'll see how many of them return next year. And of course, we all know, as many of us I'm sure are experiencing now, that a lot of companies are now having people work from home, which changes the travel industry a lot as well. Does that mean we will travel more to do face-to-face meetings because those become increasingly important since we don't see each other face-to-face, or will we move completely to a virtual world? So there's a lot of questions that are facing the travel industry now. And I would say, I think that the thing that's a little bit scary is that the short-term future is, we say mixed at best. I actually think, and this was the slide we did last Friday, I would say in the last 3-4 days, we've actually seen a bit of a turn, right? Americans who were concerned they were getting better. We've seen the numbers of the COVID infections, and hospitalizations from Texas, from the Carolinas, from Phoenix, Arizona, from California. We're starting to see a trend that actually they're going up. So you're seeing these numbers. 54% of Americans are very concerned about the outbreak. That's up 48% from last week. So on a week-to-week basis, I think one thing we're really tracking is whether what we thought was going to be a return is actually going back now. So 64% of Americans viewed returning to the pre-COVID life as risky. Now this is up from 57% last week. So I think the things to be really watching are how this continues to evolve over the coming weeks. I think we here at Ipsos are tracking this carefully, and I think my only caution is that we're seeing a little bit of a going backwards. And so I think that's a really important metric for us to be watching here as we think not just for us, but as the industry more broadly. Not surprisingly, business travelers are not comfortable either, but as you would suspect, the more frequent the business traveler, the more bold they are, right? I think frequent business travelers versus occasional business travelers, 24% today are comfortable flying, 7% won't feel comfortable until there's a vaccine. Less frequent business travelers, obviously less comfortable now, and then they want to wait a little bit longer. So we're seeing kind of these dynamics play out. Again, this is all data from last week. And interestingly, you would think that frequent business travelers are also the ones that say, okay, we're fine on vacation. Not completely the case. Maybe they feel like they must travel for business vacation. Of course, as we've seen, a lot of people planning road trips, camping trips, local staycations as we go into the summer. So I think just important things to think about and look forward to. And importantly, as we think about travel, how do we get people back? How do we bring people back into the industry, into the practice of travel, into the joy of travel? I think people are increasingly saying, okay, you need to entice me now. So whether that's special rewards, whether that's discounts, fares, whether that's point bonuses, extras and incentives, I think we're starting to see people are starting to pay attention. And I know Laura will talk about this as well. You're starting to see what are the airlines, hotels, even rental car companies doing in terms of enticing people back into the industry. So a lot of movement, a lot of things to think about. But of course, the big question is, what will it take to get people back on the road, in the air, traveling again? So that's going to be the big topic of today. But I think to start and maybe frame up our conversation, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. Roger Dow is president and CEO of the U.S. Travel Association, based in D.C. They represent all segments of travel in America, and their mission is to grow travel within the U.S. As the chief travel industry advocate, Dow and his team regularly meet with executive branch and congressional leaders to benefit the broader travel industry. Prior to joining the U.S. Travel Association in 2005, Dow was senior vice president of global and field sales of Marriott International. So over to you, Roger.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Oscar. And I want to thank Ipsos for putting this together. This is one of the great sources of research that we use, but we use multiple groups to try and triangulate what is actually going on. I thought what I might do is start by giving a lay of the land of what's going on and size the travel industry. The big picture is when we look at the economy of travel, and economy's in a recession, travel industry's in a depression. And why do I say that? I say that because there's 15.8 million Americans who get their job through travel, whether it be the airlines, the hotels, or suppliers to airlines, hotels, theme parks, rental car, et cetera, destinations. Of that 15.8 million, 8.1 million are unemployed at the moment. That's 51%. When you look, I went back and looked at the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, which I thought would have been far worse, but actually the worst year of the Great Depression was 25.5% unemployment, which was 1932 or 33 era. So the travel industry is really in twice what was the Great Depression from a workforce standpoint. When we look at this situation with COVID, all of our research and numbers and economics say it's probably 9 times worse than September 11th. And we all know how horrific and horrible September 11th was, and the impact on the travel industry, but how that then became the impact on the total U.S. economy, then the global economy, because it's all linked. When you look at September 11th, it was basically in 3 locations. It was something that was horrible, but very clear. We knew what it was, and we saw it. The difference with COVID is there's not a clarity. It's everywhere. First of all, we're talking global, not U.S. So we're talking a global situation, and we're getting conflicting messages. You can tune on your television tonight, and there'll be an immediate report that there's going to be a second wave that's going to be worse than the first wave, and we're all going to die very soon. I'll be followed up by another physician who will say, that's crazy. It's really waning off, and we're not seeing new cases in Australia or New Zealand, and talk of a second wave is really wrong. Then you'll have someone come on and say, you must wear a mask. In fact, we're going to implement masks that you must wear in all indoor places in certain cities. And then the next person is going to come on and say, you really don't need to wear a mask because it's not proven that it actually will help. And so this is the confusion that's going on. So this confusion that's going on has got the American public and business community in quite a difficult situation. When you look at the travel spend, this industry is $2.8 trillion of our economy, $2.8 trillion of the global economy. This year, 2020, we'll end with the travel down some 45%. Just travel alone, not taking the GDP, the whole 2.8 trillion is part of the entire part will contribute to GDP. But when you look at just the hotels, the restaurants, the theme parks, the airlines, the rental car, the cruise ships and all that, we're going to lose as an industry $519 billion. That's $519 billion this year. When we look at domestic trips are right now projected to be down by 30% this year. That's down 1.6 billion, that's with a B, 1.6 billion trips. That's the lowest number of trips that we've had since 1991. That's almost 20 years, we're talking about 30 years ago, we're now at a level where we were 30 years ago. When you look at international, international has been the darling of the travel industry with $280 billion worth of international travel. And the thing we like about the international travelers is they come, they spend their money, and they go home. We don't have to give them health care. We don't have to pave their roads or fix their potholes. But it helps not only build the economy, build global understanding. Well, right now, international travel has ground to a total halt. So gone are the days of last year, we had 80 million international visitors from all over the world. Let me put it in perspective from China. China, we've gone in the past 10 years from 300,000 Chinese visitors to 3 million Chinese visitors. Those 3 million Chinese visitors spend twice as much as the 22 million Canadian visitors. So you begin to see the value of international travel. When it comes to balance of trade, international travel represents a 69 billion trade surplus. So that's going to disappear this year as we talk about international. So the travel industry is one of the hardest hit that we've had of all economies. And the thing is, travel is linked to everything else. Many years ago, a century ago, we used to say, as goes General Motors, goes U.S. economy. I maintain now, as goes the travel industry, goes U.S. economy. We saw after September 11th, the travel industry came to its knees in 45 minutes. About 3-4 weeks later, the U.S. economy tanked. About 6 weeks later, the global economy tanked. Because you see, it's linked to everything else. No one decides to open a factory, to move to a second home, to relocate, what school their children are going to go to, et cetera, until they've first taken a trip. So everything is tied to our economy on how we sell products. People go to trade shows and they look at the newest products. And when they're not going to trade shows, they're not buying U.S. equipment, electronics, et cetera. Let's take a look at what the future is. We take the future, and we're doing a lot of research, and Ipsos has been very helpful in that whole area, is 60% of the people say they're going to be safest outdoors. So the outdoors areas are going to get a disproportionate amount of the increased travel. And I'm talking beaches, I'm talking national parks, I'm talking areas like South Dakota, Wyoming, North Dakota, Oklahoma, places like that you don't normally think of. When you think of travel, you think of California, New York City, Las Vegas, Florida. But those areas are going to do very well. The drive market, we're going to go back to a drive market, at least in the short term. 89% of people saying they feel safest being in their car. And we're going to see a big uptick of drive travel. So a lot of travel destinations are going to have to change what they do from their marketing standpoint to the regional, to the drive market, and take those dollars when they have them to really promote the drive, the local market. When it comes to staying in a hotel, people are concerned. 38% of the people say they plan to stay in a hotel in the next 3 months. You take the transverse of that, and you're talking of 62% say they're not. You look at 53% of the people say they want to avoid crowds. Well, where are crowds? Crowds are in large conventions, large meetings, festivals, sporting events, theme parks, attractions. So the ability for them to avoid crowds is something that we're going to have to get beyond. When you look at the meetings business is extremely critical to the travel industry. And we've been doing a lot of research on people's thinking of attending a meeting in the next 6 months. The good news is it's gone up, starting to go up month by month. 22% of people say they will attend a meeting between now and the end of the year. That was 16% in May. So that's gone up 1 month. 20% say they'll go to, that's a business meeting. 20% say they'll go to a conference or a convention. That's up from 15%. But the data that Oscar put on earlier almost could put a halt to this or slow it down, because what's happening, we're seeing that the news media now talking about new cases, second wave and all that, and this gain we've started to make may be something that we have to watch, could even slip backwards. After 9/11, we always said there's no travel without security. Without security, there's no travel. And you saw that TSA and global entry and all these things, Homeland Security were started. Now I say without health and safety, there'll be no travel. So we work very hard as U.S. Travel with the entire industry to set a set of guidelines where people will have guidelines that they will all follow. And that, I'm talking the airlines, the hotels, the theme parks, rental car companies, anything to do with travel have agreed to a set of guidelines and 6 principles that they'll do. And each industry is taking it to a different level. Like airlines, for instance, we'll be talking, you'll hear more about things you never heard of before, HEPA filters and how frequent and misting of airplanes and things like that. Hotels where housekeepers sort of were in the background. I think just like display kitchens and display cooking, housekeeping is going to come to the forefront. You're going to have new officers in hotels will be the health and safety officer. Instead of going to your room and having a little sign that says, I'm John or I'm Mary and I've cleaned your room, it's going to say, I'm John, I'm Mary, and here's the 14 steps I've taken to ensure that your room is safe. You might even see some hotels that might even have a little seal on the door that will say, you can break this seal because no one's been in the room since it was totally cleaned by housekeeping. When we talk to people about these guidelines, this is why it's so important. We ask people, if the industry says it's safe to travel again, will you? 25% said that yes, they would. But 50% said, I don't believe them. They're just going to tell me to travel because it's good for them. We asked if the government told you it's safe to travel. Same thing, about 25, 26%. Another half of the people saying, not sure we really believe them. They just want to get the economy going again. Health officials, if health officials say it's safe to travel, it went to 34%, but not much higher. Then we asked, what if you heard from all three, from government, from the travel industry, from health officials, credible, believable steps that they're taking to keep you safe? Would that change your behavior? And it jumps to 69%. So that's why it's so important to have the airlines, the hotels, theme parks talking transparently about the steps they're taking for housekeeping. So I think it's very important. One of the things we saw the research that Oscar put on corporate meetings and all that is when this pandemic started, the first thing that most corporations did, and it started in the West Coast and moved east, was to put in travel policies that basically said, don't travel, don't go to meetings. Simple as that. So, and I think it all ranged from employees pushing back to their employers saying, do I have to make this trip? Do you want me to make this trip? And their family saying, is it safe? And the HR people saying to their attorneys, what do you think? The attorneys saying, tell them not to travel. Don't go to a meeting. Can't get in trouble then. So I think what we've got to do as an industry is put the protocols in place and begin building that confidence that these policies change. And so people begin going back. And last thing I'm going to talk about is international. International travel will come back, but it's going to come back more slowly. This is going to be the next 6 months to a year of domestic travel. I don't care where you are in the world. Europeans are going to want to stay in Europe. Americans are going to stay in the United States. That's has a little bit of a silver lining because these are a lot of people who spend money on taking very big trips to go to Spain, to go to China, to go to the Caribbean, Mexico, safaris. They're going to take that money and spend it in the U.S. in the next year. So there is a bit of, and we saw that happen after September 11th. Last bit is I'm very confident that we're going to see this come back. It's just a matter of how quickly we can bring it back. After September 11th, people said no one will take an overseas trip again. They won't get on a plane. They're too afraid. Yet we saw it come back. After the Great Recession, 25% of the hotels in New York, et cetera, are going to have to close. Yet we saw 10 years of the biggest travel boom ever. It will come back. It's a matter of how quickly we can bring it back. If we can just bring travel back 6 months quicker than the 2 or 3 years that people are projecting, that's $270 billion to U.S. economy. It's 1 million jobs. So that's why it's so important to bring travel back. So I just want to share with you an overview from 30,000 feet of what's going on in the industry. What are the things we're seeing? And we're working very hard to start talking now as an industry about start planning for the future. What have you missed? And trying to get people to think about planning. And then we're going to come together as an industry and put together some great deals when the time is right. We'd be tone deaf if we said do it now. When the time is right, go to your airline, go to your cruise, go to your destination, see the great deals that are going to be there for the next month. Sort of like a restaurant week is what we're thinking about. But that's what we're going to be doing because travel is such an essential part of our economy. And I really appreciate your inviting me to be part of this panel today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Roger. It's super helpful, and I think we're all hoping the same thing. So we'll be watching carefully. Thank you. What I'd like to do now is I want to introduce Laura Mota. Laura Mota is editorial director at The Point Sky. Prior to leading editorial at The Point Sky, she was leading content teams at Sherman's Travel, as well as Travel Zoo, iVillage. She lives in Paris, so she knows this industry quite well. And what we'd like to do is what we're now calling, it used to be a fireside chat, which actually was never really a fireside chat. These days, it's more like a computer side chat. So I just want to get a perspective from you, Laura, on what you're seeing. I know Roger talked about the industry holistically from above. You know, you at The Point Sky have this huge following of avid travelers. What are you hearing? What are you seeing from your huge fan base, all of your followers, of which I'm one? What are they saying about the future of travel? And then maybe we can double click a little bit on certain industries.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me today, Oscar. I really appreciate it. You know, the thing that we're seeing amongst our audience, and, you know, we cater to an audience of very, very avid and passionate travelers, is that they are, you know, ready to travel and ready to get back out on the road. We're seeing a lot of pent up demand. But I think the big question is where can you go and how do you do it? Because there are some very big questions just about safety and also too about just basic access. So we're looking at a completely patchwork guide to, you know, completely patchwork approach to what's available right now. So you'll look at the states, for example. So you have, for example, a state like Texas, which didn't put in very heavy travel restrictions, you know, right at the beginning when COVID happened. And then you have other states like the state of Maine or the state of Hawaii, for example, that have a mandatory 14-day quarantine upon arrival. And it's even so much more nuanced and complicated than that. So some states have reserved all of their hotels and home rentals only for first responders. Other states, have, you know, they have had restrictions around campgrounds being open, theme parks were closed, but it's all been very inconsistent. So this lack of consistency has made travel very, very difficult to plan, certainly from a domestic standpoint, and even more complicated when you talk about from an international standpoint, when it comes to taking international flights and when it comes to, you know, whether the borders of a country are open or what you have to do when you get there. Do you need a test? Do you need to quarantine? So there is an incredible amount of complexity out there right now if you want to travel anywhere. So simple trip, complicated trip, doesn't matter. So that's the hurdle right now. It's not that people are saying, oh, you know, I'm like terrified and want to stay in my house and don't want to travel. They want to be able to trust that their travel experience is safe, and they want to make sure that the logistics will work for them. They don't want to show up somewhere and find it closed.
Yeah. Are you know, it's kind of a daunting picture that you're painting. Are there certain bright spots or areas you think will be more interesting to come back first, maybe where we have a little bit more control of who comes in and out and on the health front?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Roger mentioned, I think domestic travel is what we're all looking at for coming back first, where you know, myself and my colleagues, you know, and our audience too, what we're looking at for travel in the near future is we're sort of looking around us right now. Okay, so what can I do in my home state? Is there a state park that's interesting where we can go hiking? Is there a outdoor space where I've never visited before that might be kind of interesting? So these are things that we're definitely seeing tons of interest in right now. Things that are outdoors, things where, you know, safety feels like it's much more possible, you know, whereas things that are indoors in small spaces, that I think people are still feeling a little bit nervous about. But, you know, I went to Acadia National Park last weekend. It was beautiful. There was, you know, certainly not just distance, but lots of distance between you and your fellow travelers. So I think that experiences like that are certainly going to be the first to rebound. The other thing that we're also seeing a lot of interest in is home rentals. So that's something that, you know, if you're traveling within a couple of hours drive of where you are, you might want to rent a house. That's also something that we're seeing. The thing with that is that, it's been all about, flexibility and availability. As I mentioned, some states have not been allowing people to rent homes for leisure travel. So what's happened is it's sort of like, there are no deals to be found out there right now. If you are a New Yorker and looking for a home to rent within 2 or 3 hours of New York City for an affordable price this summer, you're not going to find that. So that's kind of been the interesting thing. There's so much nuance to everything that's happening right now.
Yeah. Would you say kind of that says to me that in the hotel industry, then maybe we have a bigger opportunity on the moderate or, more economic tiers than some of the bigger luxury tiers if people are starting to travel to national parks, to on the road rather than going to New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, or Chicago? Is that kind of what we're seeing from a travel hotel perspective?
I think so, yeah. I mean, the other interesting thing that we've heard is that a lot of interest in people renting RVs. And, of course, that's sort of like, there's sort of this element in there where, it was like, okay, so does everyone know how to drive an RV? But that's something, it's sort of like, it solves the lodging question, and it also solves the social distancing question. So it feels really safe. So I think people are doing all of that thinking around taking their own safety into account, taking the safety of their families into account. So all of that is very much on the radar right now.
Can we talk a little bit about the cruising industry? I know Royal Caribbean just announced yesterday that they were postponing all their sailings till the end of September or middle of September. And I know for the last decade, 15 years, cruising was on the rise, right? It was the hot industry. All the cruise lines were building ships. And now it seems like it's going to be on a bit of a pause. But on the other hand, you would think that in a cruise, you have probably pretty good control over what happens, who comes on, who comes off, if you do the proper protocols. What are you hearing, and what do you think about the future of the cruise industry?
So I think your last point is really front and center right now for the cruise lines is how do they guarantee that ship at sea is a completely safe travel experience? So through a combination of testing, disinfecting, temperature checks, all of that, how do you sort of make a cruise ship this safe floating pod that is kind of a COVID-free zone? And I think that every cruise line is asking that question now. How do they make that happen? And, as you mentioned, we had been in this period of incredible growth for the cruise lines. And to have everything sort of grind to a halt right now, it's a question mark about what that growth is going to look like in the future. That said, cruisers are from what I've seen, among the most dedicated, passionate travelers out there. There are entire groups of travelers who all they do is take cruises, and they cannot wait to get back on their favorite ships, back with their favorite lines. Groups travel together on cruise ships. So you have big family groups, and you also have the luxury cruise market, which provides very high level of service, great food, etc. So what we're seeing is kind of more and more variety in that space. And once people get there, they get really hooked on it. So I think that cruise will be back. And I think that it will undoubtedly be back stronger than ever. I think it's just a matter of when the lines can get to a point where consumers feel really safe. And I think that will happen. I think there's no question. But yeah, the brakes are on for the time being.
Yeah. And then one final area, I know we have a lot of attendees from actually the credit card industry, right? Whether you're a banker, whether you're from the banks or you're actually from a Visa or MasterCard, Discover type, and obviously the whole idea of rewards and points, where you're from, points guy, it has been such a big industry, right? And now, where is that headed? Are in an attempt to get travelers back, or people just handing out points and they're going to get devalued? What is kind of the value of loyalty going forward? Or in fact, you may choose an airline that you deem is safer than the one that you would normally pick, or cleaner, or what does the future of loyalty look like, and what does that mean for these huge loyalty programs? I think when United mortgaged its Mileage Plus program, it's several $1 billion, almost the same value as the airline itself. So can you give us a little bit of a preview of where you think loyalty points, credit card, how do you earn all of that? Where's that headed?
Sure. I mean, I think no one is giving away or handing out really cheap or free points just yet. I think that's not happening. But we've seen a couple of things. So Marriott has had some incentives, around their points program, and we've seen a couple of the airlines do it, but it's not a fire sale yet on points and miles. I think the thing, as Roger kind of mentioned, the time for deals and offers will come, but it's not right now because the demand is not quite there yet. I think once people are feeling better about getting out on the road, about flying, I think that you are going to see so many incentives, around points and miles, and I think just around pricing and deals in general. But I think that's going to take a minute. I mean, the thing that we have seen so far is all of the airlines have extended status for anyone who had status currently. So, and that has a lot of value. So if you're not traveling this year, you're saying, oh my goodness, like my status is going to expire at the end of this year. Well, rest assured, you'll have it next year too. And I think that goes a long way to really, the airline saying, okay, look, we're going to take care of some of our best customers here. The difficulty in that is a little bit, we're kind of looking at the credit card space. So in the credit card space, when you have a credit card that really rewards you for traveling, how do you reward people when no one is traveling? So what all the credit cards now have done is they have shifted their reward structure so that they're awarding you for everyday purchases, for gas, for groceries, for food delivery, for basically day-to-day purchases. And, the thing that will be interesting to see is whether that stays as this process kind of continues. So, as people start traveling again, does it mean that you will still be able to earn lots of points on groceries? I think that's what we're really hoping, is that these companies will really see that, that is in and of itself a really attractive bonus. So we'll see what happens there. But I think that the shift for those cards was really smart because everyone was saying, okay, so why do I need to carry a credit card with a really hefty annual fee that gets me all these cool travel perks if I'm not going to set foot in an airport for the next 6 months? So
great. Well, thank you, Laura. That's super helpful. I think maybe we open up the discussion a little bit here, and I want to introduce our panel. Mike Belmont is the Senior Vice President, Client Officer here at Ipsos. He does a lot of work within the multinational hospitality category and primarily looking at customer experience. Rob Gard is the Communication and PR Lead for Destination Madison, the organization that promotes Madison, Wisconsin as the premier destination for visitors and events. And Professor Chekitan Dev is the award-winning thought leader on hospitality and professor at Cornell's School of Hotel Management. He also serves as an expert witness, consultant, and speaker all over the world. So I'd also like to welcome you, and we'll keep Laura as well. And why don't we open it up as a discussion, and we can have a kind of conversation amongst what we're seeing here. And maybe, Professor Dev, I'll start with you. We've seen in the last decade the proliferation of hotel brands, right? Marriott now has a portfolio of 30 plus brands, each of the different companies all expanding on all these brands. Obviously now it looks like there's going to be a little bit of a shakedown. Where's your head at kind of how's the battle of brands going to shake out? Who's going to be left, and what are going to be some of the things that cause some of these brands to survive?
Perfect. Thank you, Oscar, and thank you all for joining this webinar. So on the subject of brands, I'm going to take you back a few years to a study some colleagues and I did around a similar kind of economic shock. And what we were looking at was which were the brands that came out of that shock looking positive and which are the ones that came out looking negative. And one of the insights from the study, takeaways, was the fact that the brands that suffered this economic crisis were the ones that were sort of flip-flopping around, looking for their position, changing their kind of orientation to the market in the short term and confusing the marketplace. And the brands that were tried and true, that maintained true to their position actually came out looking better. So the insight for this particular shock also is I'm expecting that there's going to be some serious turmoil, both within the brands. You mentioned earlier about layoffs. Hilton laid off a bunch of people at what they call the above property level, that services the brand, and also between the brands and the properties. That my other study has shown that relationships between brands and properties often determine success for both the brand and the property. And so I've not heard much about what brands are doing to help their properties. Some of this is sort of under the radar and people are making private deals. But I think we're getting to the point where those brands that are going to take care of their properties, maybe cut them some slack, maybe have some flexibility with regard to fee payments, really take care of their partners are the ones that are going to do well. Others are going to either diminish in value or fall by the wayside. Some might even go extinct.
Interesting. And Rob, what are you seeing in Madison? Are there certain kind of hotel brands that do well, certain categories that do better than others as you kind of promote the city and the region as a destination?
Well, I think a lot of what's happening now is brands on the local level are still trying to get their footing in relation to what the local situation is. Without having kind of a national standard of how we are approaching COVID-19 response, individual destinations have a lot of different rules going on. Here in Madison, we have a 4-phase process set up for how we can reopen and what we can do to what metrics need to be met to reopen. And that affects how brands are able, when they're able to open, how many people they're able to have. Certainly affects the meeting and event space. This is summer in Wisconsin. It's a great time to get outside and have those weddings, get married. But we are limited in the Madison area to the number of people who can attend a particular event. So really, it's the brands that have the flexibility, whether it's a local, regional brand or a national brand, the flexibility to adapt to the current situation and to be prepared to step forward or step back as public health guidelines dictate.
And what are you seeing? And we just got a question in. What are you seeing in sort of trends for group size? Are they getting smaller? Are we is it a dramatic collapse of group size that we're looking at, or what are their demands now, or what are they asking now in terms of what are their interests? What are are they looking for discounts? What do you see in terms of what the composition of those groups look like these days?
Well, like everyone, the group size absolutely collapsed everywhere when it went to zero for meetings, events, festivals, concerts, etc. We are slowly opening things up here in Madison. So group size will not get back to capacity of what it was 4 months ago until there is a vaccine, according to our current standards. We have seen positive health trends here in the Madison area and in the state of Wisconsin that are allowing for increased group sizes. The challenge from the meetings and event space is you're not booking a trade show or a national organizations conference 2 weeks out. You're working a year, 2, 3 years down the road. So what our team has done is adapt to what we anticipate being more of an open and return to the previous size next year by rebooking canceled events for this year. But yeah, in general, it seems like we're starting to creep back up, and a lot of the hotels are looking toward those smaller events. As a destination, we are pushing keep your meeting home. If you're part of an affiliate group, try to bring that group here rather than go to another national destination.
Great. And do we have any, and I can open it up, maybe Mike, you answer this. Are we thinking, luxury versus the middle tier versus the economy budget tier? Obviously the hotel industry has that quite well segmented and understands, the drivers of each one. Do we have a sense of what we're seeing? Some hypothesize, the luxury tier is going to come back because those are the people that were less affected by COVID-19. Or the other flip side is, as we go into an economic recession, perhaps depression, people aren't going to have the money, so perhaps the economy kind of travel market's going to burgeon up a little bit. What are you guys thinking, or what are you seeing?
I'll jump in there. It's Roger.
Sure.
I think you're going to see a couple things going on. Laura mentioned smaller hotels and individual housing and all that. And I've been talking to a lot of hotel CEOs, and we're seeing the smaller hotels are actually coming back faster. The old idea of having a motel where you could go in the door from the exterior entrance was seen as yesterday's news. It's now becoming what people are looking for a little more properly. I think also when luxury hotels, I think it's going to be luxury, and the smaller hotels will come back quicker because people are going to think luxury hotels are going to take better care of their facilities, and you know who's there in your own mind, to say, and the smaller hotels because of not being jammed in with a lot of people. One thing that bothers me when we talk about group size is I think governments make a very big mistake of saying it's limited to 50 people or 10 people. 50 people in a phone booth is very different than 50 people in an airplane hangar. And we have to begin, I think the convention and meetings area has to say, we can control our crowd. We can control the spacing, the timing, how people check in. We can control space and aisles and all that. And I think we've got to do a better job, because to say it's 50 people or 10 people makes no sense to me, because it's the square footage in the venue. We're seeing internationally, EU is just going now to drop the distance of physical distancing from 2 meters down to 1 meter. So that's a change just coming in this week. And I think, and I'd like to get rid of the term social distancing. We're a social industry. Let's talk about physical distancing or spacing, but social distancing, social has to go on and will go on.
Yeah. And you know, while you talk about physical distancing, how do the models of all these industries have to change, right? Obviously, you know, you're looking at occupancy levels, you're trying to get as many people into one space as you can. So now that we can't, operationally, what needs to change? You know, is the service model going to change? I think many people are wondering this. We're getting a bunch of questions around this. Is, you know, how do we ease into operations in a way that still allows us to survive, right? Because operating at 25% isn't going to work for most properties, or even, you know, most airlines. So what do we see, or what do you think in terms of operationally is going to have to change?
I think maybe I can take a start. I'll let Mike jump in. But operationally, I think there's some things that are going to be immediately done that will be there forever, and some things will disappear. I think the masks at one point have to go away. I think it's going to be very hard to take a trip to Australia with a mask on for 15 hours or so. And I think slowly we'll see things be peeled back, but certain things will never go away, just as security never went away after September 11th. Touchless are going to become very important. Ways of using your smartphone, and we're going to see those changes will probably be there for ongoing time and stick with us.
Mike, and I would add to that. I think on the service model from a hotel perspective has got to change quite a bit. You know, a lot of the CX work we do, a lot of it used to be pre-COVID was, you know, you had a nice night's sleep, or you were attentive and you were getting attention. That's changing a lot, but you still have to balance the safety with personal connection. So to Roger's point, it's got to be, how do you do that online? How do you keep that connection going? So there's a lot of changes in that service model, but definitely going into safety. And I think the mention on the mask, I agree with that. And I think that the challenge for the hotel industry is the training and the empathy, because different guests are going to come in with different perspectives as to what safety means, and how do you handle those, and how do you train your staff to still deal with very different travelers and how they are perceiving, you know, what's safe. And so that's definitely a challenge, is to get that right balance between touch and safety.
And Professor Dev, you obviously teach a lot of the hotel industry and how you serve and provide empathy. How do you think that's going to change?
Well, thank you, Oscar. Let me build on the points made by Roger and both Rob and Mike in this way. 2 points I'd like to make. One is, so the one part of the puzzle that's usually left out of the discussion that kind of worries me a little bit is all the surveys point to the traveler's willingness or unwillingness, or readiness or unreadiness to travel. We haven't looked at much on the supply side, and I'll give you a couple of quick data points. So my 2 children were supposed to go to Coachella in October. Coachella canceled. Yesterday, a report was leaked to the New York Times of a draft that the EU was considering banning travel from the United States. So we are also, and Rob talked about Madison and the rules for Madison that I know Roger picked up on, that sometimes the rules that are made by local and regional municipalities don't really understand the business, and they make the rules sort of sort of blindly. So there's also a supply side shock that I think is causing some of this backup, because to Laura's earlier point, the cruise lines aren't running. If they're not running until mid-September, you can't get on a ship, even if you want to cruise. So that's the one point I'd like to make. On the property side and how things are going to change in business model, and that's, as you know, at the Cornell Hotel School, that's what we talk about all the time. And that is, I see two shifts, 2 changes, 2 trends. So for the last 10 years, hotel lobbies were trumpeting the fact that they were going hyper social. Right? So connecting people, Westin Hotels actually has zones within the lobby where you can meet other people and get together. And when we did the prep for this conference, I remember one of the participants, I think it was Mike, was mentioning, I'm going to take a trip with my family and I don't want to see anybody else. I want to be by myself. I don't want interactions. I don't want to get infected. So we're going from sort of a hyper social to a hyper solo model. So that's one thing to think about. The other trend is in the last 20, 25 years, ever since the advent of the internet, even small hotels have become hyper global. We have a bed and breakfast in Ithaca that says, oh, I have guests from Argentina and China and Japan and Australia, very proud of the fact that the little 6-room B&B can reach out all over the world. Today, these hotels, small hotels, are going to go hyper local. And so the ones that are going to win, I think, are recognized, at least in the short and medium term, is travelers want not hyper social, but hyper solo, and then the business is not coming global but local. And that's going to sort of stand the business model on its head for at least a little while.
Yeah, and that's really good news for you, Rob, right? Going hyper local.
It is, and it is. Laura mentioned this earlier as well, that shift to regional travel, feeling that you're safe and you can be more spontaneous. You can say, okay, I've been cooped up here for a month, 2 months, 3 months. Let's take that 2-hour drive to a different place. And along with that kind of hyper local travel that we have is a switch to what do you have that is within your control as a destination. With rules shifting to groups that can gather in indoor spaces, take advantage of the outdoor spaces that you had. With the beginning of the year in Madison, our whole approach was we're this great urban core, this really cool, fun urban city that has some outdoor things you can do as well. We've flipped that around to focus on our 5 lakes and our platinum award-winning bike trails in our state parks, saying get out, get away from the crowds, find some space, but still tap into the urban amenities that you have, like a hotel that does have some great safety measures, or a restaurant that has tremendous patio space, or a picnic package for you.
Fantastic. So we have a couple minutes left, and what I want to do is I want to give each of you kind of a couple seconds, 30 seconds to a minute, talk about kind of what are your final parting thoughts you have for the audience. And as we said, we have people representing, on our panel as well, all parts of the industry, whether that's loyalty, whether that's a destination, whether that's customer experience, broader industry representative in Roger, from that match kind of the broad breadth of the people on the call. So if we could just go through and just give, what are your final thoughts on as we look ahead into the next, 3, 6, 9 months? What are we seeing? And what thoughts you have just to close this out? And I'll start with you, Laura. Kind of what do you think is in the next 3 months? What are the key things that people need to be paying attention to?
Well, I think, I think the key thing, whether you're an airline, a hotel, any kind of travel provider, is really sort of getting the trust of the traveler. So you really have to show travelers that, you can be amenable to their situation, whatever that may be. And I think that is going to be the most important thing. I think if you can convince a traveler that they're in good hands, they'll travel with you.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Mike, from a customer experience perspective, what do you think is going to happen, and what do we need to be paying attention to?
Yeah, well, I think to Laura's point, that's important, is the indicators. And the real barrier right now is we've been tracking a lot of data for like the last 12, 18 weeks. And what doesn't change is that the low number of people saying that they're comfortable going to a hotel or comfortable going on an airplane is low, and it's not moving. It's moving very slowly. So I think the thing to keep in mind is there's a lot we can do from a hotel perspective is to help people feel more comfortable. But a lot of that is really outside of our control, and is based on a lot of just what's going on with the virus. So. Fantastic. And Rob, from a destinations perspective, and you obviously talked to a lot of people about planning travel. What are they saying? What are you hearing? And what are your final thoughts for the audience?
I think what starts first is actually your communication and your engagement with your residents and the people who live in the area. Make them feel that your community is safe for them to get out and enjoy. And make sure that they understand that you're communicating safety measures to visitors so they are welcoming. You can have all the safety measures in place as a hotel brand or as a restaurant, but if the people on the street are not welcoming to your visitors, you're not really doing your destination a service. And so a lot of our efforts have gone into communicating what Madison has to offer in a safe way for residents to enjoy, and then transitioning those messages to those regional and drive markets.
Fantastic. And Professor Dev, what would you tell someone, an aspiring hospitality industry ingenue who wants to start a career in our industry? What would you say to him or her these days?
So my punchline for my closing comment is a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. Quoting the former chief of staff of the White House. And so just a couple of quick points. My Chinese colleagues tell me that the Chinese language, the written language, is composed of not alphabets but characters, and there are simple words and complex words. Simple words, one character, one picture, one word. Complex words, sometimes two pictures. And so they remind me that the Chinese word for crisis has two parts, threat and opportunity. So let me focus on each one for a few seconds. I'm still in shock. I read some statistics yesterday posted by my colleague and former student Jan Freitag of SDR that showed that in April 2020, the average occupancy at Las Vegas was 1.7%. A year ago, in April 2019, it was 90.1%. That's apocalyptic. I mean, I've been in the business now for 41 years. I've been on Cornell's faculty for 31 years. I've seen a lot of crises, but this is the worst it's ever been. So I'm still trying to sort through, to what extent do previous models apply or don't apply to the past. So we're in deep trouble. The opportunity side to me, though, is what I'm telling my students and my clients is this is a great time to innovate. This is a great time to take some risks. To Laura's earlier point, the people that are going to be getting on the cruise ships and go to the hotels and getting on those airplanes are the risk takers, to your earlier point too, Oscar. And they're going to be very forgiving. So things to try in revising the business model, this is a chance to seize the moment and try some things new and maybe reimagine the business model, not for a new normal, but a better normal. And I'm assured that it's coming.
Great, thank you. It's funny you talk about it. Never waste a good crisis. I will say the new terminal at LaGuardia looks very exciting. So I think the Port Authority of New York did a good job of using this opportunity to kind of get moving on a project that's been stalled for years and years and years. And Roger, I'd like to close with you. Just you have obviously a bird's eye view of the industry and what we're all looking at, and thinking about everyone that's listening from across the industry. What would you say is kind of what are the key things to think about as we move forward?
Well, I think we're in a situation that with this happening now, is a lot different than if it happened 20 years ago. Technology is going to be our bigger friend. Biometrics, things like that are coming along much more quickly, and technology will be used, as the professor said, as innovators. I also think the frequent traveler programs are in a much better position to communicate directly with their people about what they're doing and become more valuable. And lastly, I'm very bullish on the cruise industry. I'm personally invested in the cruise lines because I believe there will be a cruise industry. I believe they do a good job on sanitation hygiene. We unfortunately had the picture of people on ships for 2 weeks, 24/7 on the news. That hurt them a lot, but their bookings are up 200-300% for 2021. The cruisers want to cruise, and I think that industry is going to come back very strongly. The question is, how do they get from July to December?
Fantastic, Roger. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. As we said in the beginning, from an Ipsos perspective, this is an industry that is, as Roger said, critical to our economy, critical to all of our psyches as humans. To travel is to explore and to meet other cultures, and we will be watching carefully as well. As we said in the beginning, we were starting to see a little bit of a turn back in the last week or so as we see infection rates go up, but I think we remain optimistic and we'll be looking forward, as all of you will. So thank you again for joining us, and we will follow up with any other questions we didn't get to today into your email directly. All right, thanks again.
Thank you, Oscar.
Thank you.